psychologists, psychiatrists, including myself, were thinking that children learn to physically aggress, learn through the media, through bad peers, imitation of their parents. And with the research that we've been doing, following children from birth until adulthood, what we are seeing is that children are learning not to physically aggress. Children spontaneously use physical aggression very early. The peak is between 2 and 4, and their environment provides opportunities to learn to use alternatives to physical aggression.
So what is the peak period of aggression in the lifespan? Can you imagine? 2 to 4 years of age. I used to ask that starting up very often a presentation that was dealing somehow or other with violence. And people would say 15, and some would say older, because their experience was through, usually this would be when I would talk to the criminal justice system. 15, they would say, because it's a period of low power. You've got this big body, you have no license to drive a car, you have no license to drink. All those adult-like milestones, you're not there yet. You're like the senior citizen of nothing. So, 15, plus you're all mixed up about how you feel. You have these big grown-up emotions and don't know where to be putting them. And I think 15 is the most dangerous year of life after the first year. First year of life is the most dangerous. That's why I work with babies too. That if you survive the first year, you're at risk at 15 because of all the emotional and social pressures and your inability to address them, to control your world. You have basically no personal power at 15. And it's also the stage where mental illnesses like serious depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, they tend to start around that stage. So, but to hear that the 2nd to the 4th year of life is the most aggressive, you've got them all. So it's probably not a surprise to you, but it is developmentally typical. So how great is that for your parents to hear? That the most aggressive period of life, you don't have a Charlie Manson there at home with you. You know, you have a typically aggressive, and it's not assertive, it's aggressive. And it's aggression using physical. So, you know, if we know there are typical behaviors for a certain age, we need to know how to help them. For instance, just like in school, we know that there are typical periods of receptivity for learning certain stuff. But sometimes that is interfered with because there are also typical periods of acting a certain way. And how do you bring together the child that is with the system that we want, or our outcome? And always, the center of it is the child. And I have to say that in Ontario, we have by far the best education system that I have seen in the entire universe. And I get to travel a lot of places, and it's not always through the lens of education, but you know, the United Nations, when they were doing the 2015 millennial goals for education, they asked me to consult with them. And in the process, they wanted me to talk to empathy, to roots of empathy. But in the process of all of that, they knew about Ontario and our reputation of being one of the top education systems in the world. And you know, it's kind of like you have to go away to learn about home. And we're always modest. In Ontario, I really like that. I appreciate Canadians' modesty. But when you think about all of the things that the Ontario government has done to clear the path for little children, to be, the fact that you work collegially here in Niagara, health, education, social, everybody works together for the good of the children. It has an impact because all boats rise. In education, people know certain things that the health sector might not know. The health sector knows certain things that we wouldn't know in education. And when you have tables where people come together to discuss and plan for optimal outcomes for children, you have civil society. When you have civil society, children do well. So it informs every corner of the community when you have community tables. So I, in hearing Richard Tremblay's take on education, which I didn't share with you actually, I shared his take on aggression. But his take on education is that if you don't understand the child you're teaching, you can't reach them. If you can't reach them, you can't teach them. So the principles that you work with in the early years is all about understanding developmentally typical behavior, but understanding unique behavior, and understanding temperament, and understanding that, yes, our culture and values overlay many things, and we must be respectful of culture and values, but overarching every culture, language, gender, race, whatever descriptor you want, is our emotional lives, are the one. So when you think about emotional development, it's completely a blanket over everything. That it doesn't matter where you're growing up, you have the same emotions. And that is something that unifies our approach to children, particularly in the early years. We know it doesn't matter. Right now in the world, we're seeing a hemorrhaging of refugees. I'm doing a lot of work in Europe, and particularly in Germany, where Angela Merkel gave moral leadership in the world by saying our doors are open. And she did that. Why? Because historically, they had the Holocaust, which was the world's best example of the absence of empathy. So she led with the presence of empathy. So that whole idea, now they're frantic to have roots empathy everywhere, as you can appreciate, because what's required for us to accept one another is empathy. But I lay this out in terms of emotion, that whatever we talk about, whether it's teasing or it's bullying or aggression, whatever label we're using, we always lead with understanding the emotional life of the child. That to understand how the child feels and respect that is the first step in addressing anything. And also, when you're working with a parent whose child is transgressed, or speaking to all of your parents, there's where you might lead with sharing an understanding of think about the child's emotional life. How does a child feel? Because even though we fiercely love our children, every one of us, we don't all start at the same point. And the challenge in helping families understand how to help their children when the children are in trouble is to realize that there's an intergenerational transmission of how we parent. And there's many things that happen in our lives that can change that around. And you're one of them. Because when your child goes to spend time somewhere 5 days a week, that's incredible. So what I'm saying is that there's an amazing capacity to support parenting, to reduce suffering in childhood, whether it's through aggressive behaviors or what we might call bullying,